And we're rolling. Okay, we are on chapter 5, Mishnah 5, and we are continuing to discuss the interesting issue of interest, of what it means to gain from how you have loaned to others, and more particularly how you avoid gaining in ways that are inappropriate. Everybody remembers, or at least saw the video from last week, the idea that this is, of course, prohibited within the Jewish community because it's like you're loaning to family, and therefore we need to be careful to make sure we're not tripping over that line. Good? Good. And we're...
what happens if someone really charged interest to a family member? A really family member?
Yeah.
What's the punishment?
You know, that's a very good question.
That's what
You know, the Chachamim were so good about laying out the laws to prevent this from happening that I don't remember reading what happens if someone does. You know, even in my, you know, the Shuvot, you know, I don't. Well, I mean, there's always, you know, the Shamayim, heaven, but you know, off the top of my head, without looking it up, I would say, you know, it's a form of theft, and so you would have to pay back the interest as a type of stealing from somebody because you were not allowed to take that. But without looking it up. And of course, if somebody does it deliberately, then there would also have been makot. There would have been lashes, flogging.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And we that'd be another fun Mishnah to study. Is the Mishnah of makot. It's actually a very interesting idea.
Sounds like
A blast. Yeah. We could just whip right through it.
Mishnah Makot was written in Israel with Morocco.
Yeah. Sorry, you took me too quick there. Yes. But it actually is a fascinating discussion of both the humanity and the physicality of doing that type of corporal punishment, which of course the sages consider to be much more appropriate. After all, the Torah is besides it than things like prison. You know, what good is it to put someone in prison for 15 years? You know, flog them, penalize them if they've done something, and let them, you know, go back to work, get them back to life. What are you gaining by having someone locked away?
Protecting society.
But that's only for dangerous criminals, right? Many things that people do that they're in prison for had no violence to another person at all. So, you know, do you think really that Bernie Madoff would have stolen all that money if he knew he was going to be stood up in the town square, had his shirt taken off, and but hey, you know, retiring to a federal prison isn't. What's that?
You suffer 10 minutes after that with all the money that you
no, you don't get to keep the money. You're still a thief, right? You still have to give back what you stole.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. No. Whatever you've done, you also have to fix, and the makot kota. But that's a whole other issue. Okay, interest. But it's a good question about the penalty. That would be off the top of my head. Mishnah 5, or Mishnah 5 of chapter 5. I have a volunteer. I know. We're going to miss you when you go back north.
I notice you guys too. Tough. Number one may evaluate cows and donkeys and anything that works and eats and give them to one's fellow to raise in order to share the profit.
All right, so this is a little difficult to crack open of what it's talking about here. But if you may remember in the Mishnah we had last time, you can't give somebody a cow to raise and then he pays you back the value of the cow and you share the profits in general, or livestock in general. What this is talking about, sheep would be a more classic example. And this is talking about something like a cow, which is the cow can work, right? So yeah, I'm raising the cow for you and I'm taking care of the cow. But in the meantime, I'm getting milk from the cow, or I'm having to pull my cart or my plow. The cow is doing work. And that is considered to be okay as the wages for the person who is raising it. If you remember last time we said that if you pay somebody a salary, then you can have them raise it and share the profits. This is saying their salary can be in the form of the use of the animal. So rather than somebody being given a cow and saying, here, raise this cow for me, and you then take it and you stick it in the barn and you don't touch it, you take the cow, you use the cow, and 5 years later you give back a much better cow. the person doesn't have to pay you in the meantime because you got to use the cow. That was your salary, was use of the cow. And that does not count as interest. Make sense? Okay, so it doesn't have to be a paycheck. It can sometimes just be free use of the animal.
2, where the custom is to share the offspring immediately at birth, they do so. And where the custom is to first rear them and then give them over to the owner, they do so.
All right, so here's the issue, right? We just said that you can either have a salary or you can have use, right? Either way, and that's okay, right? Because there's no interest there. But a baby? Well, am I going to use a baby cow? I'm not allowed to eat it because it doesn't belong to me because it was born to a cow that belongs to someone else. Does that mean that the owner has to give me a salary for the baby looking after, the babysitting, but I can still use the big cow and that's paying for... Yeah. So the issue when the baby is born, the Mishnah says is don't worry about it, right?
You're talking calf, right?
Yeah, baby animal.
Okay.
Sorry, baby calf.
Where did the baby come from?
Yeah, baby animal. All right, so when a baby animal is born, a calf, or it could be any, it could be any working animal's offspring, a foal foal, yeah, foal, and then colt. Always forget that hierarchy of horses. That's why I use the word baby. So, when a baby is born to the working animal, the Mishnah says, don't worry about it. If the custom is to go ahead and divide the baby, that is to say, to deal with its value now, then you just deal with it now. But if the custom is to keep it and rear it, and then you give it back when you give back the mom, that's okay too, and it doesn't count as interest or a problem, because the baby is basically just a offshoot of the parent. And so you don't have to worry about the interest issues.
Yeah, but what happens with all the expenses? Because you need to grow the baby and you are responsible for the baby.
Right, but the baby is growing off of the mother.
Really? Until what age is a baby?
Until it's reared to maturity. That's usually the age of weaning.
Okay.
Right? Or if they're going to have it be old enough to be weaned, then usually it's also old enough to do work. So when it makes that transition, either it continues working or it is divvied up with the owner at the time.
And what they're saying is, since this is the custom anyway, we don't need to change everything.
Right.
Go see what the people are doing, and then we'll make.
And we're going to get a lot more of that as we continue through Bava Metzia and other topics of the custom being very important for how to handle certain issues with regards to worker relations or fair weights and measures and other things. Custom matters.
Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, one may evaluate a calf with its mother and a foal with its mother and give them to one's fellow to raise in order to share the profit.
Right. So this would probably work more clearly if it said one may even evaluate a calf with its mother. What he's trying to say here is even if the baby isn't born during the work, but the baby was born before the work. And the guy says, here, take care of the mother. And yeah, take care of the baby too. That's okay as well. So you might think this was only the rule, says Rabban Gamliel, because the baby was born while on your watch. But even if the baby was born prior to that, it's okay to go ahead and wrap the baby in the bundle with the mother and go ahead and make this agreement with regards to use or salary or whatever, and just bundle it in. The baby it's an accessory for the mother.
Yeah, but the baby can make the mom less productive. And can make also the work in general less productive.
Little.
and a loss for you.
Right. So that should be your evaluation when you're setting up the agreement of how this is going to work. If you want to put a stipulation in that should a child be born to this should a baby animal be born to this working animal, and it reduces the capacity of the work by 5%, then the profits will be divided, with 5%. You can always make stipulations if you're worried about that. But the general rule is the baby animal doesn't need to be spelled out clearly. So remember, this whole discussion in this Mishnah is not about what is the best contract you could make. It is about how do you avoid taking interest in these kinds of deals. And if you want to make a great contract that has 19 pages to handle everything about every possible calculation and cow and whatever, great, That's fine. As long as you don't take interest, make it as complicated as you want, make it as simple as you want, as long as you don't take interest. So you're right. If you were a person who was raising animals and working them as their salary, you'd probably eventually start making your rules about, well, you know, if it's pregnant, then I'm going to have to respect the 3% difference in the profit division because, you know, that's going to be a problem. You would begin working that into your contracts, and that's fine as long as it's not taking interest.
Right. In other words, here we can discuss it and see what works best for both of us.
Exactly.
In the other example, you can't come and say to me, "I'm going to charge you interest, so you don't get the loan and you don't get the you don't get to buy the house." There we can't. Here we're leaving it up to the two people to discuss it.
As long as they avoid the tripwire of taking interest.
But otherwise that's permitted. Okay.
Yep. You can make it as fancy or simple a contract as you like. Good. One more.
Point 3 is a tenant may offer increased rent in exchange for a loan to improve his field without fearing that this is usury.
Okay, so maybe another illustration. I like writing, it helps me talk. Ruben's got a field, right? And he's renting the field. And right now the field is $100 a month. And he asks Shimon, the old owner of the field, hey, could you loan me, let's say $1,000, and I'm going to take, and I'm going to put a well, and I'm going to make some irrigation ducts with all of that extra money. And I'm going to pay you back by paying you $120 a month in rent from now on, right? That's okay. That's not interest. Even though it is pain in the future, and even though it means I'll end up paying back perhaps even more than you loaned me, it's not a direct payback, it is rent. And rent is always negotiable between the owner and the user.
But it also makes sense because once you give me the loan and I improve the field, I am now going to make more money out of that field.
It's like a different field.
So I will get, as a tenant, I will do better. So
presumably, which is why Ruben's asking for the loan.
Presumably, so you as the owner are not taking advantage of me by doing this. You're actually helping me.
And that's just what the Mishnah wants to make sure, that some scrupulous owner doesn't take advantage of the poor guy and say, I'll tell you what, I'll give you a loan of $1,000 and you'll be able to, you just got to be careful. But yes, it is permissible in the structure. Firsthand?
What if I say, give me $150, pay me back $150 a month for 60 months?
Mm-hmm.
That sounds awful.
You're doing math a lot faster than me. I'm assuming that comes out to be more than the original 1,000.
Well, I say it comes out to that, but the fact that it's a short time period and it's more than.
It's a much higher interest rate if I was paying it back as a loan.
Right.
Right. So that is the reason why this is permitted in this Mishnah is the idea that I sort of said it off the cuff, but this used to be $100 a month field, right? Mm-hmm. But after the improvements, it's now going to be let's say $150 your value a month field. So I'm not paying you interest on the loan. I'm paying you the new rent for the field that is better than it used to be. Right? The field is now better than it used to be. And let's move fields because most of us aren't farmers. Let's imagine you were renting a house from somebody, and you asked them for a loan of $10,000 to remodel the bathroom. Right? So one way in American law, you could pay back that loan for the remodeling of the bathroom by just giving them the $10,000 over time with such and such percentage interest. Not allowed under Jewish law because that's interest. On the other hand, if the owner says, well, with that new bathroom, this is now a more valuable house. So if I were going to put this back on the market, the rent would go up by $100 a month. Then that's fine. If you want to go ahead and pay a higher rent for the now improved house, that's okay for you and okay for the owner. And that doesn't count as interest, technically, even though the owner is getting his money back and may even get back more money than he originally gave you. It's not because of the loan that's making him the money. It's the improvement to the property that's making him the money. Did you have a?
I did. It's just because in a couple of weeks I'm going to be reading about how Pharaoh's daughter pays Moses' mother to
for the weenie for the wet nurse
for the wet nurse.
Yes.
So then, who even owns Moses anyway? Of course, it's not it's not an animal. But then where is that like correlate to this?
So in
Because you're paying for something and then you're getting it back, and
right,
yeah.
and that actually was a very analogous situation and a very common practice. Royalty, like people today, didn't always think they had time for infants. Bring it back to me when the child is interesting, rather than just an eating and other machine. I think modern research has shown that those months in the beginning are rather important, but that was a common practice. So go raise it until it can be, away from a lactating mother, and then I'll take care of it. So that is very, very analogous. But as far as the ownership goes, under Egyptian law, Pharaoh's daughter took possession of this child and proclaimed it as her own and adopted it officially under Egyptian custom. Therefore, it was her son. And she was simply hiring someone to look after it the same way I would hire someone to look after my sheep. It's still my sheep, though. Okay, Mishnah 6. I'm determined to get through this chapter today.
Point 1, one may not accept a flock from an Israelite on iron terms. That is, that the one who tends the flock shares the profits from the flock and accepts full responsibility for their value.
All right, so this is like terrible deal. But somebody might be forced to take it if they couldn't get a better deal. And that's why the Mishnah is trying to protect us from it. So here are the terms of the deal. Let's see anybody who wants to sign up. You're all shepherds. I've got a flock of sheep. I'm a rich sheep owner, but I can't look after them myself. I will let you take care of these sheep, raise them and bring them to market. And in exchange, I will split the profits. But in the meantime, you assume all the risk. Right? If one of those sheep die, I don't care. You're giving me the value of the dead sheep. Right? If lightning bolts kill all of them, you still are on the hook for the value of all these sheep. Now remember when we talked about our guardianship issues earlier, that's different, right? That's different. But here the incentive, of course, is, well, hey, you get a job and you get a chance to share the sheep. And if you do your job well, you're going to get paid well. But that is essentially providing interest to the person who is giving up or giving over the sheep for care, because the other person is going to be most likely compensating them for the opportunity to be sharing in those profits, rather than simply an equal share with an equal risk. Right? We mentioned a little bit last week, as soon as you begin offloading all the risk onto one of the members of that arrangement, chances are you are hitting up against the wall of interest. Make sense? Okay. But
one may accept a flock from a Gentile on iron terms, and money may be borrowed from them, and one may lend them money.
Right. Go ahead and finish off the list.
The same is true with a resident alien, and an Israelite may lend the money of a Gentile with the knowledge and consent of the Gentile, but not with the knowledge of an Israelite. Okay.
So this is where we see explicitly, as was explained in the Torah itself, that the issue of lending with interest, again, often erroneously called usury, is allowed when dealing with people outside of our family, outside of the people of Israel. However, in the last part of section 2, well, actually, let's make sure we understand that. Right, so that covers parts 2 and part A. That would normally be prohibited when dealing with the family, dealing with the people, are allowed when dealing with people outside that circle. Everyone's clear on that? Okay. Part 2B says, if, do we need a diagram? No, we can do this verbally. Right, if Mr. Smith gives or loans money to Mr. Cohen, Mr. Smith is presumably non-Jewish, right? Mr. Smith loans money to Mr. Cohen. Mr. Cohen can, as you see, with the knowledge and consent, loan that money to someone else, even with interest, right? Because he's not loaning his money, he's loaning Mr. Smith's money. Make sense? Make sense? Yes. But if Mr. Levy loans Mr. Cohen money and Mr. Cohen loans the money, it does not work, because then you would be helping Mr. Levy make interest off his money with the Jew. So you can be a go-between for the money that is being lent into the Jewish people from an outside source, but you cannot be a go-between for a Jewish to Jewish loan if it's going to be adding interest into that process.
So a bank can use a Jewish in order to lend money to another Jew, and that's fine.
In the modern world, because the bank isn't a Jewish institution, yes.
It's not a Jew.
Right. But if you had a 100% Jewish bank, the Bank of Joshua Neely, well, I mean, that was what banks used to be, where it was like one person or a family or a very small group, before they became huge corporations, then that would be a problem. Where, Jewish people were putting money in the bank, and the bank was taking and lending the money to the Jewish people. That would be an issue. But where it is a secular, no identity to the institution, then that becomes permissible.
But that's very tricky. I can't see a lot of loopholes. I can take one partner, like figurative my partner, that is a goy. So in this way, oh no, the bank is not, I'm not full 100% Jew, so I can lend to another Jew with interest.
Okay.
I have my partner that
Right.
only figurative, that is not Jew.
And the same thing also comes up with issues of being open on Shabbos, or doing other things that are prohibited for a Jewish-only institution. And the rabbi said yes, that these are loopholes, but they are loopholes that the Torah permits, because if the Torah didn't want us to do that, the Torah would have been written differently. Right? That's something to always come back to. And whenever you think, oh, wait, that's just a loophole, is the rabbis aren't finding loopholes out of thin air. They are finding loopholes by reading the text in a certain careful manner and saying, if God had wanted the loophole closed, God would have legislated differently. Right? By the way, that's the way loopholes work within any legislative system. Right? When someone says, well, that's just a loophole in the tax system, it's like, yeah, but the government put the loophole there. And unlike God, we may or may not believe the government intended the loophole, but when it comes to God, we do believe that if there's a loophole in the system, that God intended it. Because God wasn't like going, oh man, I never thought of that.
Yeah.
God anticipated anything that we might do with regards to the law, and if God had wanted it to be written differently, it would have been written differently. So any loopholes you may have found are entirely intentional, or at least permitted.
There is a bakery where I live in Massachusetts, a fully kosher Hefshed bakery,
Mhm.
and every Friday afternoon he sells it to his non-Jewish employee,
Mhm.
and he doesn't work during Shabbos, but the bakery then stays open under her auspices,
Right.
and then Sunday morning it opens again. She sells
It's
it back to
transferred
him.
back. Right.
If they didn't do that, the bakery couldn't exist.
In many
And
circumstances,
so,
yes.
so when you look at it, you don't want a Jew to be completely unsuccessful because you've laid all these burdens of things on him.
And-
So that loophole makes perfect sense.
And it can also be done just in a partnership sense as well.
That's true.
Take, for example, if you're a Jew and you want to run a factory, right? You want to build pens. Well, if your factory isn't running 24/7, how are you going to compete in the modern world?
So what happens in this case if the employee doesn't want to send back
Well,
She's out of a job.
right. Yeah, but she owns a bakery. Right. So usually the arrangement that I'm more familiar with is actually bringing someone in as a partner,
Yes,
where they are actually a partner in a bakery or a restaurant or a store that is
works
open
too.
on Shabbos, and it's a question of the assumptions about where the profits are going for certain days. And like you said, the Jewish person is still not allowed to work on the day itself, but a partnership is a little more stable than handing it back and forth.
True.
But clearly, they found an arrangement that works,
It does work for them, absolutely.
and it is
So the
permitted.
clientele on Saturday is,
But you know what? It's not
Sometimes it's better not.
it's-
Sometimes it's better not to ask.
Yeah, you don't have to. That's right.
So yeah, because unfortunately, if you're still open, then some people are still going to come that
This is America.
maybe shouldn't be purchasing on Shabbos.
Someone will stop
but-
by on the way home from shul. Sorry.
You'd be surprised how often that
communities
has,
where they exist, that businesses do exist.
Yes.
you know,
No,
that,
because also if someone want to buy a product there on Shabbat,
Mhm.
they can do it maybe without paying. Say, you know what, I take this, I will pay you after that. After
So
Shabbat.
sometimes you can do that, or you can
Yeah,
prepay it
Shabbat.
before, and if there's an Eruv, you can carry it home. There's lots of ways to work around this. But the fact that some people are inconsistent in their Shabbat observance should come as no surprise. It happens.
When my great-grandfather came here in 1896 with the intention of bringing over his wife and children, he worked here for 2 years.
Right.
And at the end of 2 years, he wrote back to her and said, do not sell anything, I'm coming home. Because he saw the Jews would come out of shul and buy a newspaper.
Right.
They would come to place. He said, you cannot remain a Jew in America. So he went back to Poland.
Now, no offense, but 100 years later, you've proven him wrong.
Well, that is true, and the rest of the family was wiped out in the Holocaust.
And that's an even more tragic.
And I sometimes wonder whether he would think of me as a Jew. I don't wear sheitel, I'm wearing pants now. I often have
And you're
wondered
sitting
what
here
he would
studying
think.
Mishnah? I think he would think you of a Jew.
Maybe so. Oh, I hope you're right.
You know, the head covering is less important than what's in the head.
That's, we'll come to that.
All right,
Yes,
Mishnah
thank you.
7.
Nice.
Mishnah 7.
Number one may not set a price for produce before its market price is known.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about commodity trading last time. This is where commodity trading, where it hits the fan. So here's the issue. Let's leave aside complicated modern instruments and go back to the ancient world. I want to buy grapes from you, and you want to sell me grapes, but there's a problem. You don't have any grapes because the grape harvest hasn't been brought in yet. So I say, okay, well, tell you what, I'll pay you now for the grapes that are going to come in a month. There's a problem with that.
It's a check.
What?
We write a check.
But the problem is not with the question of a check, because a check is easy, right? If I say I want to buy $100 worth of grapes, we're good, we're golden, that's okay. The problem is if I say I want to buy 100 pounds of grapes.
Oh, right. You don't know how much that'll be worth.
We don't know how much it's worth. You know, coming from Florida, everybody knows that the report of what the orange juice crop has been,
Yes.
or the orange crop is going to affect the commodity. So this is an issue of, if I give you $100 now for 100 pounds of grapes, but no one knows how much the grapes are really going to be, then when the grapes come due and it turns out that they are worth more than originally, then it looks like I just made some interest off my giving you that money early. Right? It's almost like you paid me in grapes for the money that you got to keep in the meantime and use.
But it's not actual interest, because at the beginning, they didn't know what will be the price, and say, well, I want this community. I want, for example, this chair. Okay. If I say, okay, I'm producing for in another month, and you will give back. Okay, fine. If they don't close the price, it's just a chair. It's like at the beginning of the Mishnah here.
Right.
Like we extend the product. Okay, it's not interest.
Okay, so it's not interest in the modern sense. Absolutely not. But it is interest in the sense that the rabbis believe that this had the air about it of I am profiting more than the money I gave you was worth. And the reason I'm doing so is because I gave it to you early in order that I get my profit from you later. Right? So that's what the rabbis are seeing. They know what the intention is, but they're watching the result.
And what happens if it was in the other way?
Oh, well, if it goes down, it's not a problem. But the rabbis aren't, and we're going to get to that in a second, but the rabbis are not worried about the bottom end, they're worried about the top, right? So let's put some numbers on this, right? On January 1, I give you $100. On August 1, you give me back what is now worth $120 of grapes, right? I just made 20% interest on my $100 investment. Why should I have made 20% interest just because I gave you the money early? Now, in the modern world, I know we have all sorts of explanations of why we think that's great. But most of them involve the fact that I didn't get to use the money in the meantime, and you did. And you've done things with the money that we were fine with you, so you don't mind losing that extra 20% off your grape harvest because you got to use the money between January and August. That, the rabbi said, that smells like interest. that smells like the potential for interest. And therefore, if the price hasn't been set, or you're not buying value, but you're buying quantity, then that's a problem. Again, all of this is solved by me just saying, I'm going to write you a check for $100 worth of grapes for whatever grapes are going to be worth. That's always fine, because I'm going to buy $100, I'm going to give you $100, and I'm going to get $100 in grapes. No interest has been accrued. It's as soon as I'm buying it by quantity without the price set that the potential for that increase becomes problematic.
But if the price is only $80.
We're going to get to what happens when the price goes down, or potentials. But the rabbis knew that no one is going to go into a business agreement by saying, I'm going to pay you $100 or I'm going to pay you buy 100 pounds of grapes, and this is how much money I'm giving you for it, with the intention that the price will go down. Right? They're hoping. Well, nowadays, yeah, but that's because we've built this elaborate, financial system. But when you were a merchant in the back, no one would deliberately short sell grapes. That just didn't work.
Soros did a lot of money.
What's that?
Soros did a lot of money with this.
Yeah. And we can talk about how different the world would be if we were to still be following this on a universal scale. And there are some definite benefits, and there are also some negatives with the way capital and other things are managed. So it is a mixed blessing internationally. But when it comes to an intergroup, it generally, I believe the rabbis were right, it protects the cohesion of the group to not be having interest in all of these arrangements. But not exactly a loophole, but there is an important caveat.
After its market price is known, one may set a price. For even though this one does not have the produce, another does have it.
Right. So once everybody agrees, all right, grape harvest this year, very good, $1 a pound. We're all agreed on that. Okay, good. That's what the going rate's going to be. And then you can fiddle in the haggle and all of that. But everyone knows what the basic baseline is. I can come to you and say, I want 100 pounds of grapes. And the guy can say, great, I'll have it for you on Thursday. But my harvest isn't done yet, but I'll have it for you on Thursday. That's okay, because it's already been set. And if you didn't buy it from me, you could just go down the street and buy it from someone else. So even though you're not getting your payoff immediately, and even though in the meantime the price of the grapes may go up, there was a giant robbery or fire in the grape storage district, I don't know. Even though that might happen, it's okay, because I could have bought my grapes on Tuesday and gotten them on Tuesday, and it's not my fault that the price has fluctuated in the meantime. Make sense-ish? Okay.
And point 2 is, if he was the first to harvest his crop,
someone's got to be first.
He may set a price with his fellow over grain stacked in a heap, or over grapes in their harvesting basket, or over olives in a vat, or over the clay balls of the potter, or over the lime as soon as the limestone is sunk in the kiln.
Right, so as soon as it's been gathered, even before it has truly been turned into a usable product, I can make a deal with you for what I've actually got. Now, it may turn out that limestone in the kiln is going to turn out amazingly good. It's going to be the best, results ever, in which case I was a fool for making the deal for the price I made. But I owned it when I made the deal, even though it wasn't finished, and even though the market price would probably have been higher had I waited. That was the deal, and it was with a real object at the moment. It wasn't with an imaginary object at the moment, and you could have taken the limestone and walked away right then and there. You didn't have to wait for it to be done in the kiln even. So it's not considered interest, even if you gain by buying it early before it's actually done. But the guy has to actually have it. Right? In the harvesting buckets, while they're on the vine, no dice, because when they're on the vine, who knows what's going to happen for them? There's no way to set a market price when they're on the vine in the eyes of the ancients. Nowadays, I know people have market prices for 3 years worth of grapes, but that's the way our modern instruments have developed.
Well, while they're on the vine, there could be a sudden frost, and the grapes,
forest fire, flash flood, all of this.
Right.
Yeah.
Once it's in the basket in the barn, then at least you know what you have. So it's right.
Exactly. And you got a rough idea of what it is, enough to actually set a reasonable price. Make sense? Onward.
Sure, we're not go onward.
Oh, yeah.
One may set a price for manure at any time of the year.
It's not free. I remember this is pre-fertilizer. Manure was your fertilizer. So the output of your animals was important because that was kind of how you were going to be getting more of this stuff to grow from the ground.
And so Rabbi Yossi says, one may not set a price over manure unless the seller has manure on the dung heap.
So he's trying to be strict by this, to say, I don't care that it's in the cow, it's got to be on the dung heap. I know you know that your cow is going to produce, thank you, that's very delicately put, but it's got to be there. However, the sages say,
sages do permit it.
Yeah, they say, no, that's a reliable crop.
Yes.
That's a reliable crop. Even though it doesn't exist yet, even though it hasn't been harvested yet, we can go ahead and make the sale. And even though the price may jump up or down.
One may set the price at the cheapest rate that will be at the time of delivery.
Right, so this is going back to our question of what happens if I'm willing to say, I'm going to pay you $5 a pound for the grapes. No, I will pay you whatever the lowest amount is, the going rate when they are finally harvested. Yes, because by saying that, I have guaranteed that I am on the bottom end of the scale, not the top end of the scale. And that means there won't be any increase, there won't be any possibility for interest. So yes, you can guarantee the bottom. You just can't do it with the potential for coming out on top, because coming out on top is way too close to collecting interest.
Rabbi Judah says, even if he didn't set the price at the cheapest rate, he may say, give me that at such a price, or give me back my money.
Right, so you can agree before the harvest and before the sale, you can say, look, when the grapes come in, I'm willing to pay you $5 a pound for them. And if you find out that they're worth $8 a pound, then we'll just cancel the deal. That's also okay. So you can be first in line. You can get your foot in the door. You can make these arrangements, while you've got cash and the other guy needs it. But it has to be done in such a way that you're not going to come out profiting by having advanced the money in advance, having given the money in advance and then gaining this additional interest back because the market turned your way. I know, hard to be a businessman, right? It's almost like you have to really make sure you're producing something rather than just getting lucky on the market.
And clearly I've learned that all this produce is quite organic, not chemically fertilized.
Well, you didn't have that option, and there was no such thing as Monsanto. Okay? It's back of the cow was all you got. All right, Mishnah 8.
Point 1 is a landowner may lend his tenants wheat to be repaid in wheat if it is for planting, but not if it is for food.
Okay. Again, you have to be a bit of a farmer here. So you would buy wheat seed that you would use to plant, and you'd also buy wheat kernels to grind up and make into flour and bread and food. And what they're saying here is because the price of food goes up and down, sometimes dramatically, that was not an acceptable repayment form. However, planting seed was usually of a more stable price. So I can loan you wheat now in order that you can plant, and at the end of the year, you can give me back as much wheat as I loaned you. That will go back into my granary, right? For planting purposes. But I'm not going to charge you at the food price for wheat. It's just going to come back and go into the seed silo. Make sense? So we can see, of course, the difference would be if I'm going to lend you wheat to plant with, and you're going to pay me back. Let's say I'm going to lend you 100 pounds of wheat to plant, and you're going to pay me back in 100 pounds of wheat that is for food. If the food price has gone up, let's say that not a lot of the harvest came in and yours did, then, hey, man, I just made out like a bandit because I gave you 100 pounds of seed and you gave me back 100 pounds worth of, really fine grain wheat, then I just got interest.
And what happened with the food for animals?
What do you mean?
They use the same seeds of the wheat for the animals.
No one feeds their animals wheat.
No.
Well, who would?
No.
In this day, no one would waste good wheat. You give the animals the worst of the food. Not wheat is like the top, right? It's the chaff and it's the dregs. It's the idea of giving your animal fancy feast and these wonderful gourmet food. Just go back 400 years and people would look at you like you were absolutely crazy. So yeah, and wheat was considered to be at the top of the food chain. That was the best grain that you could get, and grain was what you needed. That was the staple. That's why we say the motzi, because lechem it's the staff of life. Okay. Rabban Gamliel, on the other hand, was even stricter with himself. And this goes to the idea that although the Mishnah says this is the law, a person can choose to be a little more stringent with themselves.
So Rabbi Gamliel used to lend his tenants wheat to be repaid in wheat when it was for planting.
Mm-hmm.
And if he lent it when the price was high and it afterward fell, or when it was low and it afterward rose, he used to take wheat back at the lower rate, not because such was the rule, but because he wanted to be strict upon himself.
All right, so even for the planting equivalency, he would add in his own stringency to say, no, I'm always going to make sure that I'm the one who comes out worse in this bargain, because I don't want there to be even the hint, even though it's permitted, but you might still feel like somehow there was interest exchanged here. And again, to go back to the idea that taking interest can really break apart a community, and he didn't even want it to be a whiff of possible feelings like that.
He can afford this because he was rich.
Yeah.
Because he lost a lot of money. Any other of the poor rabbis, maybe they could.
Absolutely, which is why it is what Rabban Gamliel did. It is not what the halacha is, right? So yes, sometimes it's easier to be strict when you're wealthy. Go back to Shulchan Aruch and read about kashrut and what you do with pots and pans and things like that. People did not have 15 meat pots, 15 dairy pots, 15 Pesach pots, and 15 dairy Pesach pots, and all the different plate settings and all the different. No, you couldn't afford to do that. You had to find ways to make do and rekosher and reuse things in ways that were still kosher. But nowadays, people look at and go, well, that's not how we do kosher. I need to have 2 sinks. I need to have 2 ovens. I need to have 2 refrigerators.
2 kitchens.
And people have 2 kitchens, and then they go away for Pesach. You know, it's you can only do that if you are rich. And I know many of us don't feel rich, but compared to people who lived 500 years ago, we are all in this room loaded.
And as my mother explained to me, in Poland, they didn't have much. If you take a look at traditional Passover foods, there's nothing dairy. They didn't have 2 sets of dishes for Pesach.
Yeah.
So there's no dairy because you needed to have meat for the seders and all.
Right,
So
and then with the timeline, I mean, who's going to take the time to rekosher a pot?
if you could even afford another pot.
Yeah, but no, I mean, take one pot and you can use, this is not normative, now, because we're lucky enough to have places like Target and Bed Bath & Beyond where you can buy pots for $10. But people would have to take a pot and they would have to rekosher it and make it a dairy pot. They'd cook their dairy food in it, and then they would wait 24 hours and they would reuse it as a meat pot. I mean, what else are you going to do? It's how many pots do you think you have?
Well, that's why they wait sometimes 12 hours between dairy and meat, because they need time to recover.
That's actually for a different reason, but that's for another day. That's for another day. And by the way, the waiting 12 hours was already a stringency on a stringency.
Yes.
So that's a whole nother thing. It was much more about brushing your teeth originally. Okay, Mishnah 9.
Mishnah 9.1 is, one should not say to his fellow, lend me a core of wheat,
That's a quantity.
and I will repay you at the threshing time.
Okay,
But he may say, lend it to me until my son comes, or until I find my key.
the commentary is really important on this, right? So I'm going to lend me the core now and I'll repay it to you much later. Well, again, this could really imply that the price is going to go up in the meantime. However, what here he's trying to say is, my son is coming and he will open the storehouse. He will open the silo, and then you can have your core. Meaning it's just for a very, very short time, short enough that we're not worried about market fluctuation. So let me find my key, the padlock to the wheat container. That's what's really being decided. But there's still some delay, because what's being discussed here is a measurement, and Hillel is not happy with that.
No.
Right? Remember, we said value for value, no problem. I'm going to give you 100 pounds of wheat. You're going to give me back I'm going to give you $100 of wheat. You're going to give me back $100 of wheat. No interest has happened. I'm going to give you 100 pounds of wheat. You're going to give me back 100 pounds of wheat. Potentially, we have a problem if the price of wheat goes up. So Hillel would say.
Hillel used to forbid this. Hillel used to say, a woman may not lend a loaf of bread to her neighbor unless she determines its value in money, lest wheat should rise in price and they are found to be engaging in usury.
All right, so imagine the care that Hillel was saying we needed to have. that someone comes by and says, oh, you know, I'm having a dinner party and I realized I'm a loaf of bread short. Can I borrow a loaf of bread? And you say, yes, the loaf of bread was $5.95. And when you repay me, you need to repay me $5.95 worth of bread. And that's all. Do not get me $6 worth of bread. Do not get me just a loaf of bread at whatever the going rate is. Right? It's $5.95, done. Or you just make it a gift. But obviously in the ancient world, people couldn't always be gifting food to each other because food was expensive, you know, a large portion of their income. I don't know if people realize how small of a proportion of our income we spend on food compared to most of the people in the ancient world and in many parts of the third world. That's why when Purim rolls around, we give gifts to each other. The primary form of the gift giving is food, because that was a real gift, better than socks. So what's being described here is don't just give a loaf, give value for value so that there's not an issue of, well, I gave you a loaf of bread, I expect a loaf back, and gee, it's famine now, so the loaves are 4 times what they used to be. No, you give me back the value of the bread.
It's sort of like if 2 months ago I said, Rabbi, please, I need to do shopping. Can I borrow a tank of gas, my car, and I will pay you back in January?
And a tank of gas, that's a problem. Thank you.
Problem.
Beautiful example. Beautiful example. That's a lot more familiar to us than wheat. Yeah. But it's a perfect example. And indeed, it's an example that rental car companies try to benefit from all the time. That's why they have that exorbitant price for, you know, we'll fill it up for you at $18 a gallon. But yes, the gas would be, if I lend you a car right now, it's got $10 worth of gas in it. You just have to put $10 worth of gas in it when you bring it back.
Whatever quantity that is.
Whatever it is under the future market, price. That's fine. Okay. Mishnah 10 looks complicated. It's not bad. I promise. I know there are other ones I tell you that are complicated, and you know, we grind our teeth. This one's not so bad.
Okay. First point is, one may say to his fellow, help me weed and I will help you weed, or help me hoe and I will help you hoe.
All right. I know we're not farmers. So we have to understand that weeding and hoeing are activities that are done at different times during the agricultural cycle, and they're done at different times during the year. And depending upon the year and what has happened, the value of the labor for the different activities may go up or down, right? At certain times of the year, we need every hoer we can get. And that means that hoers are going to be able to charge more. But at other times of the year, hoeing is a cheap activity because there's not so much hoeing going on. So I will hoe for you and you will hoe for me. That's okay. However,
one may not say, help me weed and I will help you hoe, or help me hoe and I will help you weed.
Right, because me weeding with you, me helping you weed, I'll be with the order here.
Yeah.
You helping me weed now may be $5 worth of labor, but me helping you hoe later may be $10 worth of labor, which means you just gained interest, because me helping you at that time was more expensive than you helping me at this time. But me weeding with you and you hoeing with me at the same time, we're exchanging equal value. No interest is happening. And no, they don't get into the nitty gritty of who's the better weeder. It's just the generic price for that labor. Make sense? This is how careful. And this is also why, for example, if you go to a good Jewish bookstore, you will find whole books on all of these types of issues of what it means to take interest or cross this line. But we should be this careful of, what am I getting, what am I giving, and am I unduly benefiting from my fellow person?
All days of the dry season are counted alike, and all days of the rainy season are counted alike.
But you don't have to go crazy, right? The 33rd day of the dry season is a slightly more valuable work day than the 34th day of the dry. No. Dry this season, this is what the labor costs during this time of year. We're not going to parse it by hour.
But one may not say to another, help me plow in the dry season, and I will help you plow in the rainy season.
Because between the two seasons, there may be a much bigger difference in the price of those labors.
So Rabbi Gamliel says there is interest that is paid in advance and interest that is paid afterwards.
All right. How so?
So if one intended to borrow from another and made him a present and said, this is so you will lend to me, This is interest that's paid in advance.
Yeah, I know. We just ruined most of corporate America, right? Let me take you out to dinner. Let me invite you to the golf club. Let me do all of these gifts and all of these presents because I am hoping that you will loan money to me later. Even if the loan has 0 interest, that is forbidden. Because basically the gifts I gave you to convince you to loan to me, that is a pre-interest gift. We understand? I know it's like just, well, how do you do things? Well, you actually have to convince people to do business rather than bribe them. I mean, rather than pay interest. Sorry, rather than pay interest. I mean, interest is a form of bribe. Okay.
If one borrowed from another and repaid it to him and then sent a present and said, this is for your money of which you had not had use while it was with me, this is interest that is paid afterwards.
Right. Thank you very much for your support on this wonderful business product. Project. Here is your new Mercedes. Right? It's interest after the fact. Even again, if the loan was a 0% interest loan, me giving you a gift later is me giving you interest because of that business transaction that we had.
That's forbidden.
That's forbidden. Absolutely. Absolutely. What's that?
Both cases.
In both cases,
Both
yes.
cases.
Both cases, yeah. I can't give you a gift before you give me the loan, and I can't give you a gift after you gave me the loan. In fact, so much so, are we careful about this?
That Rabbi Shimon says there is interest paid in words. One may not say to his creditor, know that such and such a person has come from such and such a place.
Right, that's called insider trading, but I mean, not illegal, but I mean, it's a business tip. Hey, I know that you work with silks, and a boat just pulled into the dock I saw, and they're offloading silks. And you've just benefited him unduly because of the loan that he gave you or is about to give you. Right? You're trading that information for the loan. He is getting interest out of that business exchange. Even though no money changed hands except the 0% loan, it's still forbidden. Strict, isn't it? Why is it so strict? Let's see what the Torah says about this.
This will be Mishnah 11?
Yes.
These are the ones who transgress a negative commandment. The lender, the borrower, the guarantor, and the witnesses. And the sages say the scribe also.
Right, so everybody involved in this process is considered to be a sinner. Right? Everybody who lends, who borrows, who makes the guarantee, who witnesses it, and even the guy who draws up the document, if you do it, you have violated the Torah. And not only have you violated a lot of commandments.
And some of the commandments they violated first. You will not give him your money upon interest, that's in Leviticus. And you shall not take usury from him, also Leviticus. You shall not be to him as a creditor, that's in Exodus. And nor shall you place upon him usury,
also
from Exodus. And also you shall not put a stumbling block before the blind, and you will fear your God. I am the Lord. And that's Leviticus.
Right? That when you tempt people into these arrangements, that's what they mean by stumbling block. Because as we said at the very outset of this chapter, interest is a very reasonable proposition, right? Well, you're depriving me of my money. Therefore, when you give me my money back, I expect some compensation for not being able to use it in the meantime. And that's why it is permitted to the general world. But the Torah recognized that interest and this kind of financial profiteering off of someone else, especially given that most of the time that loans were used in the ancient world, the biblical world, they were charity loans, is really an exploitative act that is extremely negative to the society. And therefore, the rabbis are trying to just drive it in. You don't do this if you want to build a tight community that doesn't have the rancor pulling itself apart.
Yeah, but
he raised his hand. I got to go for the hand.
How does the poor scribe get sucked into this? And those citations don't address him, even though the sages say it's not.
Right. So part of it is stumbling block, but part of it is the sort of the generic one. But the other is without the scribe, they wouldn't be able to do it. Right. If you could not find somebody to put together the document, then chances are you wouldn't make the loan. If you couldn't find some way to prove that you owe me 15% interest, because after all, this is not a business contract I can take to the Beit Din. All right, let's say, for example, I loan you $100 on 15% interest and you default. What am I going to do? Take you to the Jewish court? He promised to pay me 115% and he didn't. Like, what are you talking about? That's forbidden.
So Al Capone's bookkeeper is liable too.
Exactly right. Al Capone's bookkeeper was liable too, because he knew he was dealing in a criminal activity. And without him, Al Capone probably wouldn't have been able to function. Almost certainly in Al Capone's case, but even small-time loan sharks, they need someone to manage the books. And if you're going along with that, then you are also profiting, surely by your salary, but you are also enabling this act. It's the same reason being a fence for stolen property is also such a negative thing. Now,
I have a problem here, okay, with all this Mishnah. Okay.
is this because you're a real estate agent?
No. Let's say that you're right, that the rabbi tried to be very careful. They try to be very careful to build a community, to set community that have a good relation between everyone. It's very beautiful.
Right.
However, they were fine with the loopholes, and they knew that, and they know that the loopholes are destroying all this. So in theory, we are protecting community relationship, but actually, there are so many. It looks like and cheese bruschetta with all the holes
cheese.
there.
There aren't that many loopholes, and I don't want to give that impression.
No, but only the thing that if I have a partner that is a good, I can extract interest from another Jew. That's a huge one.
That's a huge one, but the other Jew has to take it. Or the other Jew goes to another Jew and says, look, Shapiro over here is trying to charge me interest on behalf of Mr. Smith, but I don't want to do that. Even though I know that it's Mr. Smith's money, I would much rather borrow from a Jew who isn't going to charge me interest, even as a go-between. And that was always the solution, right? So yes, there were loopholes that allowed in certain emergency situations or special cases and such, but they were not intended to become the norm, because the norm should be that the rest of the community wouldn't need the loopholes.
So you say that the force of the market will protect us from double standards.
Good way of putting it, yes. Right, because the loopholes create an extra burden, right? Because now Mr. Smith needs his cut, and the guy in the middle needs his cut, and we know the scribe needs his cut. So that's created an extra burden, whereas if I can go to another Jew, it's free.
Yeah, but you have also all this social aspect of peer group pressure and everything, like what happened, for example, if the person that you are in a small village and the person that have the money is the one that can abuse. You don't have another alternative. Like, you understand? I feel like there's a double standard. In theory, it's beautiful. In practice,
right. So in practice, it doesn't work if the community doesn't force it to work. And that's one of the reasons why the people were always supposed to be educated to understand what the Mishnah and the Torah were talking about. And the religious courts, the Beit Din, which was for this, not just for conversion, were supposed to be constantly trying to protect and adjudicate. So knowledge was the ultimate defense. And even if there's one rich macher in the community who is trying to pull all the strings, if everybody in the community knows this is not what Torah says, then why would I do that any more than if there was a rich guy who was trying to sell me a pig? Why would I eat a pig? I know that that's forbidden. I know it's not allowed. And don't tell me loopholes. I have alternatives, and I will find alternatives because I know that what he is trying to create is not what Torah is supposed to be. And there may be loopholes that are legal, but if they become a problem, then people will turn away from using them. And we have, historical examples where people would take stringencies upon themselves as communities in order to protect themselves from going down the wrong path. But you're right, you do need a community, and you need peer pressure in the positive way to really overcome much of this.
What if Mr. Smith is going to be charging 10% through that scenario?
Right.
And the Jewish guy over here says, I'm going to help you because I'm going to charge you only half of that.
It's still forbidden.
Right.
I mean,
it sounds kind of like a loophole, right? So he's still doing some good because he's helping him not to have to pay the 10%.
Right, and we call that the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, which tells you, you know, you're still nicer than Mr. Smith, so aren't you entitled to some benefit because of the good you're doing? And that's the little voice in your ear that is, not helpful. But you're right, it's there, and it's really easy to self-rationalize, both for yourself and the person you're helping, which come back to one of the greatest admonitions throughout the entire Torah, which is the sabbatical cycle. And it says, the Torah is obviously a beautiful read of human nature. When it gets close to the end of the sabbatical, when all debts are canceled, you may think to yourself, I don't want to loan to the poor because the debts are going to get canceled. Do not, because you will cry out to God and God will punish you because you have hurt or allowed your fellow to be hurt. Right? So the Torah understands that it's sometimes hard to be helpful to other people and gain no benefit in monetary value straight back, or even in good words straight back. And that's why we serve Torah rather than mammon, rather than money, because money is a thankless master and one that only hurts us and hurts others. Doesn't mean we don't use money, doesn't mean that money is something that we should be ashamed of, but that is not our priority, it is not our North Star, it is not our compass. Good? Good. All right. We're gonna